Chapter 1. The Cage of Shame. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, casting the prairie in hues of deep orange and purple. The dust of the small frontier town clung to the air like a constant reminder of its harsh life. Clara sat on the cold, iron floor of the cage, the bars towering around her, rusted and unforgiving. The clang of the sheriff's boots echoed from the dusty street, mingling with the distant sound of a creaking saloon door and the chatter of the townsfolk inside. But Clara, confined to her iron prison, had long ago stopped listening to the world outside. Her eyes were locked on the setting sun, its final rays casting long shadows across the barren land. The wind picked up, sending tiny particles of dirt spiraling through the air, and she could smell the sharp, dry scent of sagebrush. Her fingers tightened around the bars of the cage as the familiar knot in her stomach tightened, pulling her thoughts back to her reality. She was trapped, not just by iron and wood, but by the lies the town had wrapped around her like a noose. "Clara," a voice called from the doorway. The sheriff stood there, his silhouette half hidden in the dusty twilight. "You better come on inside. They're waiting for you." Clara didn't respond. She wouldn't. The cage might have been her prison, but she wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. The words of the townspeople echoed in her mind like a chorus of crows, calling her everything but a woman. Sterile, that was the worst of it. A woman who couldn't bear children had no place in their world. And Clara had been cast out like a dying ember. The sheriff sighed, the weight of his boots heavy on the floorboards. "Don't make this harder, girl. You know you're not helping yourself by sitting there like a ghost." Clara glanced up at him, her gaze sharp, but there was no venom in it, just weariness. "I'm not helping myself. No, Sheriff, it's this town that's trapped me here. You got me in a cage for something I didn't choose." A scoff left his lips, and he stepped closer to the bars. His hand rested on the handle of his holster, fingers itching for the comfort of his gun. "You may not have chosen it, but that don't matter. Folks here don't take kindly to the likes of you. Best you just accept your place." Clara's breath hitched in her chest. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her body wanted to break free, to fight back, but all she could do was sit there, the walls pressing around her. As she stared into the sheriff's eyes, she could almost feel the weight of the entire town's judgment bearing down on her. Then, from the distance, a new sound caught her attention. Hooves, the rhythmic thud of them against the dirt road, growing louder with each passing second. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she turned her head toward the sound. The sheriff, noticing her shift in focus, turned as well. A tall, dark figure appeared at the end of the street, framed by the dimming light of the sunset. His silhouette was massive, a giant on horseback, with the shape of a cowboy that made him seem like he had stepped out of a legend. His hat was low, but even from this distance, Clara could see the way the dust clung to his broad shoulders, the swagger of his approach. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You just keep quiet, girl. This ain't for you." But Clara didn't hear him anymore. The world around her had faded, leaving only the figure of the cowboy growing closer. Her pulse raced as he drew nearer, his horse's heavy gait kicking up the dust, and something deep inside her stirred, something that hadn't been stirred in far too long. The cowboy stopped in front of the cage, his face still hidden beneath the brim of his hat. He dismounted with fluid motion, his boots thudding heavily against the ground. Without a word, he walked toward the sheriff, his eyes never leaving Clara's. The sheriff opened his mouth, ready to speak, but the cowboy silenced him with a single word. "Open it." The sheriff froze, his jaw tight. He studied the stranger for a long moment, but then, reluctantly, he turned the key in the lock. The cage door creaked open, the heavy iron sound cutting through the evening air like a gunshot. Clara stood up slowly, her knees aching from the long hours on the cold ground. The cowboy took a step forward, his presence filling the small space. He was so close now, Clara could feel the heat from his body, the power in his movements. His gaze was steady, unwavering, as if he saw through her shame and straight into her soul. "Come with me," he said, his voice rough and deep, like gravel dragged over stone. It wasn't a command, more like an invitation. "You don't belong here." For the first time in what felt like years, Clara dared a hope. Chapter 2. A Giant Among Men. The soft thud of Ryder's boots against the dirt road seemed to vibrate through Clara's chest as he approached the cage. The sheriff had already turned, making his way back toward the saloon, but Clara didn't notice him anymore. All that mattered was the giant standing before her. His presence filled the dusty street, the evening light catching the edges of his broad shoulders and casting long shadows over the ground. His horse, a massive black stallion, stood tall beside him, restless as the wind stirred its mane. Clara blinked, unsure if her eyes were deceiving her. He was enormous, like something out of the stories told by the old-timers who gathered at the saloon at night. His face, rugged and weathered, had the kind of look that spoke of hard work and long years under the blistering sun. The kind of man who could break horses with his bare hands and shoot a man dead without blinking. His hat was low, casting his features in shadow, but Clara could see enough. The tight jawline, the set of his brow, the scars that ran across his weathered skin. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the prairie grass, the smell of sagebrush mingling with the faint, sweet scent of the horse's sweat. The clinking of spurs from behind Clara seemed like a distant memory now. The world had narrowed to this man standing in front of her, his every movement measured, his stance solid. "You're Clara." His voice came low, rough, like the creaking of an old wagon wheel. Clara couldn't find her voice at first. She hadn't spoken to anyone in so long, hadn't had the chance to defend herself, to say anything except to argue with the sheriff. Now here was this stranger, a giant, a cowboy, and yet somehow something about him made her feel as if she might not be completely alone. "I am," she finally replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers gripped the bars of the cage again, as if they were the only thing keeping her grounded. The man took a step closer, his boots scraping against the ground, and Clara could feel the heat radiating off him, the weight of his presence. The air between them felt charged, but not with danger. Something else. She couldn't place it. "I've heard enough about you," he said, his tone softening just a fraction. "None of it's true, is it?" Clara lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was something deep in those eyes, something she couldn't read, gentleness, maybe, but also a quiet, steady strength. For the first time since she had been thrown into the cage, she felt seen. The weight of judgment that had clung to her since the day the rumors started to spread, the gossip that turned her into the town's pariah, it all seemed to fade away in that moment. Chapter 4. On the Open Plains. The ride stretched for hours, but the vast expanse of the open plains was something Clara had never seen before, and it was breathtaking. As they passed through the wilderness, the landscape unfolded in front of her like a forgotten world, a place untouched by the harshness of town gossip, or the cage she had once called home. The sun had dipped fully beneath the horizon, casting the sky in a gradient of deep blues and purples. The stars twinkled above them, so clear and close it felt like she could reach up and touch them. The wind had died down, and the quiet was all-consuming, broken only by the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the occasional creak of the saddle. She sat tall in the saddle now, the awkwardness of earlier long gone, replaced by a strange sense of peace she hadn't known for years. Ryder rode ahead of her, his broad shoulders framed by the last glow of the dying light. He looked like a man born to this land, at home in the silence, in the wide open spaces that seemed to stretch on forever. He moved with the grace of someone who understood the rhythm of the earth, and Clara couldn't help but watch him, her thoughts wandering as they trotted along the well-worn path. "How much further?" she asked, her voice quiet, unsure if she even wanted to know the answer. For the first time since she had been locked away, she was afraid to leave this moment, afraid to let go of the freedom that had been handed to her so suddenly, as it could slip through her fingers like sand. Ryder didn't look back, but answered in that steady, calm voice of his. "Not much further. You're safe with me, Clara." She didn't reply, unsure what to say. The words felt foreign. She was still trying to wrap her mind around the fact that she was not only free, but traveling with a man, a stranger, into the unknown. There were questions she hadn't asked, things she hadn't considered, but somehow she felt that she could trust Ryder. There was something in the way he had spoken to her, something in the way he had never treated her like a pariah. The path grew steeper as they climbed a small hill, the earth beneath their feet turning harder, the sparse grass giving way to rocky terrain. Clara shifted in her saddle, stretching her stiff legs, and glanced around. The flat plains were behind them, and now they were surrounded by jagged rocks and twisted trees that seemed to claw at the sky. She didn't know exactly where Ryder was taking her, but she felt a growing sense of curiosity. The landscape was starkly beautiful, raw and untamed, much like the man riding beside her. As they reached the top of the hill, the view spread out before her like something out of a dream. A small cabin sat nestled between two large outcroppings of stone, the faint light of a lantern flickering from within. A few horses grazed nearby, and in the distance, the outline of the barn could just be seen against the deepening night sky. It was isolated, quiet, and peaceful. Ryder finally slowed his horse, turning to face her. His eyes were soft, yet there was an intensity in his gaze. "Welcome home," he said. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Home! The word seemed almost impossible to fathom after everything she had been through. Could this place, this wild, lonely cabin, really be home for her? Could Ryder, a man she hardly knew, be someone who could offer her a new life, free from the shame and the whispers of the town? She met his eyes, searching for answers in his weathered face. He wasn't just offering her safety. He was offering her something more. But what? And why? "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here," Clara murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know if she was speaking to him, or to herself. Ryder's gaze softened, and he dismounted the horse, walking toward her with a slow, measured stride. When he reached her, he extended a hand, his large, callous fingers brushing against hers gently. His touch was warm, steady like the earth itself. "You don't need to know just yet," he said, his voice carrying the weight of things unsaid. "We'll take it one day at a time. This land, this place, it's yours if you want it. No one's going to lock you up here." Clara stared at his hand, at the offer in his eyes. She was trembling, not from fear, but from something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. Hope. It seemed impossible, like a dream she had long abandoned. But there it was, growing stronger with each moment she spent beside him. "I don't even know how to start over," she said, her voice shaking now. She swallowed the lump in her throat, feeling vulnerable, exposed. Ryder didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, then moved to untie the reins of the horses. "You don't have to do anything right now," he said as he worked. "We'll figure out together." Clara's heart ached. She had never known kindness like this, gentle but unwavering. It was a tenderness that felt foreign, unfamiliar, yet it made her feel safe in ways she hadn't felt in years. The weight of the world she had carried on her shoulders, her guilt, her shame, seemed to lighten just a little as they led the horses toward the cabin. The night settled around them like a blanket. The sounds of the wild seemed far away, replaced by the soft murmur of the wind through the trees and the gentle rhythm of their footsteps on the ground. Clara couldn't remember the last time she had felt this peaceful. The air smelled of pine and earth, of the promise of something new. When they reached the cabin, Ryder opened the door with a creak, and the faint glow of the lantern inside illuminated the room. Clara stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The place was simple but warm, with a wooden table in the center, a few chairs, and a small bed in the corner. The walls were rough-hewn, the floor creaking underfoot, but felt like a home, a real home. And as she turned to look at Ryder, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it could be hers. The door shut behind them with a soft thud, and Ryder turned toward her. "You're safe now. No one's ever going to put you in a cage again." Clara nodded slowly, her heart racing. There was so much she didn't understand, so many questions still unanswered. But for now, all she could do was hold on to the moment, the simple truth of it. She was here with him, in a place where she could breathe without fear. And for the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to live without the cage, to live with the freedom Ryder had promised. Chapter 5. The Storm of the Heart. The wind had shifted by the time Ryder led Clara to the cabin. It was a restless kind of wind, one that stirred the leaves in the trees and ruffled the hair at the back of Clara's neck. As the sun set behind the jagged hills, the air grew thick with the scent of rain, and the sky darkened quickly, turning a smoky shade of gray. Clara stepped into the cabin, her boots scraping softly against the floorboards. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the chill of the outside world, but something inside her felt different now, something heavier. The quiet of the plains had wrapped itself around her like a blanket, but as the night deepened, so did the tension inside her chest. She was alone with Ryder, in his cabin, with nothing but the crackling of the fire and the whisper of the wind outside to break the silence. She set her bag down by the door, then turned toward the fire. It flickered in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls. The storm outside was growing stronger, the wind howling through the cracks in the walls, and Clara found herself drawn to the warmth of the flames, her eyes flickering between the fire and the man who had brought her here. Ryder was at the far side of the room, tending to the horses, his broad back facing her. His shoulders were tense, his movements purposeful as he unhooked the saddlebags from the horse's back and carried them inside. The cabin, though simple, felt safe, but Clara couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over her. The storm, the darkness outside, and the closeness of Ryder, it all pressed in on her, and she found herself fidgeting, unable to settle. The fire popped loudly, snapping her from her thoughts, and she glanced up at Ryder, who had turned toward her. His expression was unreadable, but Clara saw the shift in his posture, the way his eyes softened when they met hers. "I'll go gather some wood," Ryder said, his voice low, almost as if he was testing the silence between them. Clara nodded, though she had no idea why she felt a sudden surge of anxiety. It wasn't like her to feel so unsettled, not here, not now, but the quiet between them seemed to grow thicker, more pronounced, and she couldn't help the flutter in her chest. The gentle way Ryder had held her hand on the ride, the way he had promised her safety, it all echoed in her mind, but so did the raw, honest emotions that had begun to surface since she'd come here. She had never let herself feel this much, this close to another person, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. She didn't know what was happening to her, and she didn't know how to handle it. The wind outside began to howl again, louder now, as if the earth itself was crying out. The windows rattled in their frames, and the storm broke, releasing sheets of rain that slammed against the wooden walls. Clara could hear the water rushing through the trees, the world outside turning into a wild, untamed beast. Ryder was back, his heavy boots thudding softly against the floor as he returned with an armful of logs. He placed them by the hearth, the flames crackling as he stoked them, sending a wave of warmth through the cabin. He was quiet, focused, but Clara could see the tension in his movements, the slight clench of his jaw. "Storm's going to be a bad one. he murmured as he added more kindling to the fire. "Might be stuck here longer than we planned." Clara didn't answer at first. Her mind was too tangled in the emotions she didn't understand. The warmth of the fire, the closeness of Ryder, it was all too much, too fast. She could feel the heat of his presence behind her, but it wasn't just physical heat. It was something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken when she caught herself looking at him. She turned toward the fire, her hands clasping together in front of her. "I'm not used to this," Clara admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not used to being around someone who isn't telling me what I am, what I should be." Ryder paused, his hand resting on the edge of the mantel as he looked at her. His gaze softened, and for a moment, Clara could see the raw sincerity in his eyes. It was more than just concern. It was an understanding, like he knew exactly what she was feeling, as if he had been where she was. "You don't have to be anything here," Ryder said, his voice low and reassuring. "Just be yourself. You're safe here, Clara. No one's going to tell you what to do, what to feel." But Clara couldn't seem to silence the doubts in her head. Her past, the years of being told she was enough, wasn't worthy. Those voices still echoed in her heart, even in this place, even in the presence of Ryder's calm strength. She was afraid to let go, afraid to trust, afraid to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could finally be more than the sum of her failures. She turned to him, her heart pounding in her chest. "But what if I don't know how to be anything else?" Ryder moved toward her, slow, deliberate steps, his presence filling the room like a shadow. His eyes never left hers as he reached out, his hand resting gently on her arm. The contact was so light, but it felt like an anchor, holding her steady in the storm that raged outside, and the one that raged inside her. "You don't have to know," he said softly, his voice a low rumble. "You don't have to have all the answers. Not yet, not ever. All you need to do is breathe. Clara, breathe and let it happen." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She felt the storm of emotions inside her swirling like a tornado, spinning faster and faster until she wasn't sure she could keep standing. Her heart was racing, her body alive with 1,000 different feelings, but all she could do was stand there, staring at him. And then, without thinking, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her heart was pounding in her ears, and she felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. Ryder's hand was still on her arm, warm and solid, and she felt a pull toward him, a connection that she couldn't deny anymore. The storm outside seemed to quiet as she reached out, her hand trembling as she placed it on his chest. Ryder didn't move away, didn't flinch. Instead, he closed the distance between them, his hand slipping from her arm to the back of her neck. His fingers were rough, but there was tenderness in his touch, a quiet kind of gentleness that sent a shiver down her spine. And then, without a word, Ryder leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in the gentlest of kisses. The storm raged on outside, but inside, in that small, quiet cabin, everything else faded away. All the fear, all the doubt, it disappeared. And for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to feel something she thought she would never have again: peace. Ryder pulled back just enough to look at her, his breath mingling with hers, both of them standing on the precipice of something neither could name yet. But in that moment, Clara knew one thing for certain: she wasn't alone anymore. Chapter 6, A New Beginning at Dusk. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow over the landscape. The storm had passed, and the air was fresh, tinged with the scent of rain-soaked earth and pine. The cabin, once a shelter from the storm, now felt like a home, a place where Clara could take a breath, and the weight of the past seemed just a little lighter. She stood at the window, her fingers resting lightly on the rough wood of the sill as she gazed out at the land that stretched endlessly before her. The sky, a brilliant shade of pink and purple, seemed to go on forever, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a sense of belonging. Ryder was already outside, tending to horses. His broad frame was a familiar silhouette against the early light, moving with purpose as he checked the fence line, his strong hands working the ropes with practiced ease. Clara watched him for a moment, her thoughts tangled. He had shown her a world she'd never imagined, wild, free, and untamed. She had never thought that something like this, something so simple, could feel so right. But there was still a question lingering in the back of her mind, one she hadn't dared to ask, even though it gnawed at her in the silence of the cabin. What now? What did this life mean for her? What was she supposed to be in this place, in this quiet corner of the world where no one knew her name or her shame? She turned away from the window and stepped toward the small table in the corner. It was bare, save for a few pieces of firewood and a mug of cold coffee. Clara ran her hand over the rough-hewn wood, her fingers tracing the grains of the table, and a thought occurred to her. It was a simple thing, this table, this cabin, but it was more than she had ever had. It was a chance to leave the past behind and start over. But could she? Could she really leave behind everything the world had said she was, everything she had believed about herself? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door creaking open behind her. Ryder stepped inside, his boots heavy on the floor, his broad frame filling the doorway. He looked at her for a moment, as if sensing the weight of her thoughts, before stepping further into the cabin, the door clicking shut behind him. "You're up early," he said with a quiet smile, wiping his hands on his pants as he moved toward the fire. "Thought I'd let you sleep in. We got a full day ahead of us, and I figured you might want to take it slow." Clara glanced up at him, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I'm not used to sleeping in," she said softly, her voice still thick with the weight of the night. Ryder studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You've been through a lot, Clara," he said quietly, his voice rough with something that might have been regret or understanding. "And I know you're not used to having time to think, but this is your time now. You don't have to rush anything." Clara turned away from him, her gaze drifting back to the window. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never had the chance to be someone who's allowed to just be." Ryder didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved toward the fire, stoking the embers with slow, measured movements. The crackling of the flames filled the silence between them, and Clara felt the weight of his presence beside her. "You don't have to be anyone but yourself," he said finally, his voice steady but gentle. "No one here is going to tell you who you should be. The land doesn't care about your past, Clara. It just cares if you're willing to give it a chance. And I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for. We'll take it slow, together." His words hung in the air, and Clara turned to face him. The room felt small now, the space between them filled with something that she couldn't name. It wasn't just gratitude or relief, though she felt both of those things. It was something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster every time she thought about it. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time, she realized that maybe that was enough. "I don't know what the future holds," Clara said, her voice catching slightly, "but I'm willing to try." Ryder turned to her then, his eyes softening with a warmth that felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. He walked toward her, his hand extending toward her, but he didn't touch her right away. Instead, he stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, but far enough to give her space. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly. "You've already made it this far, and you got the land to help you now. The rest? Well, that's just time." Clara swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know if she could believe him. Not fully. The wounds from her past weren't so easily healed. But in that moment, looking at him, at Ryder, she realized something important. She didn't have to carry all of it anymore. Not by herself. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust again. He extended his hand, palm open, inviting her to take it. Clara hesitated for a moment, her heart racing, but then she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with gentle strength, and something shifted between them, something unspoken but understood. As they stood there, hand in hand, Clara felt the weight of the past lift just a little. She wasn't free yet. There was still so much to face. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was facing it alone. The sound of the wind outside, the rustling of the trees, the distant call of birds, it all felt so far away from the cage she had left behind. The door to the cabin creaked again, and Clara turned to see Ryder's horse, tethered outside, waiting patiently for them both. The world was vast out here, and the possibilities felt endless. The past was a distant memory now, and the future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady now, the fear no longer gripping her chest. Ryder smiled, his eyes crinkling at the edges. "Good. Let's start with today, Clara. Tomorrow will come when it's ready." They stepped outside, the sunlight warming their faces, and for the first time, Clara felt the weight of the world fall away completely. She was no longer locked in a cage. She was free to decide who she would become. And with Ryder by her side, Clara was ready to find out. The cabin, once a symbol of isolation, now seemed a distant memory, swallowed by the wide open spaces that stretched before them. They had built a life together, one filled with quiet mornings, shared smiles, and unspoken promises. Yet now, at this moment, Clara felt a deep ache in her chest. She had never thought she could belong somewhere. But this was home, not because of the land, but because of the man beside her. As they reached the top of the small hill, Ryder slowed his horse, the creaking of leather saddles the only sound in the stillness. The prairie spread out before him like a canvas, the sunset casting its final, fiery hues. He turned to her, his eyes steady but tender. "Clara," he said, his voice soft but unwavering. This is what I've been waiting for." Clara's heart raced as she met his gaze, the weight of the journey they'd shared hanging in the air like a promise. She reached out, her hand brushing against his, the gesture simple but filled with meaning. "I never thought I could be loved like this," she whispered. "But with you, I feel like I've finally come home." In that moment, the world seemed to fall away, leaving only them, their past, their struggles, their love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world into twilight, Ryder pulled her close. "You've always been home, Clara," he murmured. And with that, the land embraced them, the wind whispering its blessing as they rode into the night, their hearts in perfect sync.